I got my tarps down. I am working carpet. Whenever you're doing any type of drywall painting, you always want to put down plastic, tarps, even an old sheet, anything just to protect your area. It is a messy trade, so you always want to put down something to catch your mess. Tarps are easy on these small jobs because I just roll them up, shake them out, put them in the trash can, shake them out, so it's easy. So I put down some masking paper. If you don't have a masking machine like I do, you can just put a piece of paper, tape, plastic, anything there. I'm going to be spraying the Kills stain blocker on the stain, so I don't want to get it on their wall because we don't want to turn this into a painting wall job. So we're just working on the ceiling area, so we're protecting the walls. This stuff, when you first buy it, you gotta really shake it vigorously, get it mixed up good, because it is a thick material. So on these stains like this, I like to always just pre-spray, just in case there's anything loose. Some textures, like popcorn, that are stained, you can't scrape them, of course, but regular textures you like to spray. But there's nothing to it. It's just like spray painting. You just spray paint over the stain blocker. You just do a nice one coat, just like spray painting, and then you just let it dry. Same thing here. Here's another one. So I like to go through and I just do one area at a time. Same thing, you just shake it up, go through, and you see how it just makes that stain disappear. That's why it says blocks tough stains, sticks to all surfaces, so it seals it up. When I get into drywall repair areas that can be refinished, you just want to scrape all that loose stuff out. This one's a seam, so I'm going to get into that actual tape seam and dig that out really good. But I like to get all the loose stuff. These ones I don't need to do any drywall repairs to, but this area is going to need a drywall repair. And then around the fan area, same thing. I just scrape everything out. Even though I'm going to do drywall repair, I have the can out, so I'm still going to spray this on to at least get it to start to dry. Around the fan. This is just a one coat that I'm doing right here. Before he goes and paints the job, he's also going to follow through with a roller stain blocker primer over all the new drywall and this whole ceiling area, and it'll really make it disappear. But we pretty much got rid of all the water stains just like that, and I haven't even used a half a can of Kills primer. This can's about $5, $6. And you can even let this set up. It dries pretty quickly, and you can do another second coat right over it. Just a quick second coat. And you can go the opposite direction that you sprayed, so you get both angles, every direction, so it doesn't shadow. And just like that. Now there's no stains on the ceilings. I used about a half a can of this, and I still have enough for the next job. But these are the secret to these, so that it doesn't clog. Before you put the can away, you always tip it upside down. Give it a quick spray. That kind of clears out the spray head, and you're good to go. Then I like to always give it a quick shake. And with this, it is a spray paint, so if you're able to open up windows or doors, you always want to do that, because this is a strong stuff. So I'm just going to let it breathe. Let the room breathe while I work on this drywall repair. So now this seam, I'm going to let the Kills dry a little bit, but I'm going to start working on this drywall repair. Started trying to work on the seam. In the ideal world, we like to get the old tape out. This one's starting to be stubborn. So we do a new technique. We call this V-notching. Whenever I work at the tape, I always try to get the old tape out, but this is an older job. So this is what I like to do on these cracks. You see there's like just a hairline bulge. It goes about 5 or 6 feet. So what I like to do on these is I like to open up the bulge. They call it V-notching. So I just kind of do a 45-degree angle on each side and V-notch the crack. V-notch. And I take my 6-inch knife and I work out the old area, and sometimes that helps free up some of the old tape, and just like that, now it's going to come out easier. You like to try to dig out all the old stuff whenever you tape. I don't like to put tape over tape. I like to try to get the old stuff out first before I start doing any other method like this V-notch method. And you see, just by making that V-notch, it helps loosen up the tape. This is an older job, older house, so it has many layers of paint over the years. So we just keep working it. Done that for a little bit. It's really stubborn to get it out, but I got most of the tape out. Once you get that old tape out, it leaves a deep groove, so it's a lot easier in mud whenever something's deep and recessed, because you're just filling in the area. If I didn't dig out that tape and I just put tape over it, now I have to build out the mud heavier on the sides to kind of feather it out so it doesn't look like a hump on the ceiling. But my next step after I get the tape dug out is I always like to find the studs. Sometimes it's hard. You can do the old knock method. You can use a stud finder. Those are all fine and dandy. What I do on here is I actually kind of push up on the drywall, and you can see where it doesn't flex, I marked it. So there's a stud here, and then you see there's a stud here. So I kind of mark it with the edge of my 6, and then we always put screws in drywall repairs to tighten up existing areas. We like to put a screw on each side. This is one sheet, 2 sheets, they meet each other. This is the joint seam. So on here we're gonna put a screw on each side, and it's tightened up, but I always like to take it out another 4 to 6 inches. And you always wanna make sure you catch the stud. You'll know when you catch the stud, because it will sink in, and you wanna get these screws countersunk, and if you miss the stud, you just kick it over just a little bit. So okay, that one's good. Then we follow through with the next stud. Usually studs, it's supposed to be every 16 inches. Sometimes it's every 24 inches. So sometimes it's right on the money, most of the time it isn't. So we kind of go off the 16, 24 inch center rule. But I want to at least get a few screws on each stud. You can really take it out full length, but the repair doesn't call for that extensive. And then I like to scrape everything as I move along, get all the little goobers out. You can peel off the papers, all the excess stuff. So I got screws in that stud. I'm gonna move over to the next stud. Screws in that area. On my last videos, I show you the importance of using this corner bead bonder. It helps the fiberglass tape bond well, damage dirty old drywall. It helps the tape bond well and also gives it a good bonding adhesion for the hot muds we're gonna use. There's other methods. You can kill it, primer it, put a bonder sealer, but I like to use this quick spray glue. And anytime I'm gonna be taping an area, you don't need much. I just do a quick spray. This stuff is a tinted pink stuff, so you can kind of see where it goes. Right now I'm sort of running out of material on here, so I'm going to use up the rest of the can on this one. Same thing, a full can. Whenever you use spray paints or spray stuff, I like to turn the can upside down, and that clears it out so it doesn't stay clogged up, and then you can use it on another job. So right now we're going to use our fiberglass to tell you the importance of fiberglass doing the hot muds. I like to go a little past my joint area, and you see where I dug out that old tape, how it just fits in that nice little channel right there. So we just move along. This is a 7.5 foot, 8 foot ceiling, so I'm using a little step ladder to reach the top of this. But I like to go along, I like to press it down. And the seam, it just barely goes by, so I just go about an inch past my actual repair area, just so I know. If there's really bad gaps, you can always double layer the fiberglass, but not necessarily all the time. Sometimes too much is too much. But this one, I'm gonna put an extra layer of fiberglass tape. The fiberglass tape is cheap. Making return trips is not. So we're just gonna double layer it and give it that extra credit. Go the extra mile here, 110% is what we give. So now that it's taped up and ready to go, I got it all stained blocked, I got screws in the drywall. Got the old tape dug out, so now we're gonna go and mix some 5-minute mud and do a first coat, 5-minute process on this. So I'm gonna go mix up just a quarter of a pan of this 5-minute mud. This is not gonna use a lot of materials. Sometimes it's better just to mix what you're gonna need, and you can always mix a little more so we don't waste too much materials. This 5-minute, it's a cheap material, it's about 10 bucks or so a bag, but it does add up when you have to use a bag a day, every day, 7 days a week, so it starts to add up after doing this every day. So I'm just gonna basically first coat it with this seam. I like to strike it in, and I like to actually push down hard so I get the mud inside there. It's kind of like a pre-fill. That mud's getting pushed up inside the gap. That way I know it's nice and in the grooves and seals it up. Now that I got it pre-filled, I like to follow through with a nice heavy first coat. It doesn't have to be terribly heavy, but we are filling in bad area, refinishing it. So I like to go through, coat it out. Same thing here on the side, just feather the side and feather the other side. You can go any which way you want, whatever's comfortable to you. So we're just gonna follow through and do a nice heavy coat. I'm pushing down the knife, as you see, I'm not standing it up, I'm pushing it down, and just so it does a nice fill coat. This is a first coat, so it doesn't have to be pretty, it's more of a fill first coat. And once it sets up, we can really work with it doing the second coat. Same thing here, the tape, I like to just strike it in, and push down as hard as I can to get that mud in the groove, and then I turn around and follow it up with the first coat mud. I'm running low on materials, so I think I'm just right on the money when I mix. Sometimes if you have a little more materials, you can take it out a little past the cracked area so you know this whole area is done and secure. It gives it the best job. So I'm just putting on all my materials I have on here. The same thing you follow through. You feather out the side, feather out the other side. And then I'm going to bring it into the other end so we only have one lap mark, so it makes it easier to feather. So it's pretty simple, nothing to it. It's just a quick basic first coat with some 5-minute quick set mud. Now I use my materials here. I always like to dump, like here I have some paper masking, or sometimes you always want to put an area to dump your extra mud so you're not stepping on it. Paper, an empty mud box, piece of plastic, trash bag, anything works. Then I just like to push the stuff over it so I'm not stepping in my mud, because the worst thing you can do is step on this and track it through a customer's home on their carpet and stuff. So I'm gonna let this set up. It usually takes about 5 minutes. It is a 5-minute mud. Sometimes it can set up anywhere from 3 minutes to 10 minutes. So we just wanna get the materials on there, and then we go wash up our tools and basically set ourselves up for the next coat process. The next step, I'm gonna wash my tools. I'm gonna come back in with a wet sponge, and we're gonna hit the edges and manipulate the mud before it gets too dry. So it's a perfect time before it really sets up to use a wet sponge slicking method that I'm going to show you. Now what's on is starting to set up, so I'm going to take my damp wet sponge and I'm going to hit the sides of it and kind of work with it with a 6-inch knife. I always want to make sure my 6-inch knife is clean, ready to go. So I like to always hit the edges first. That way I get it nice and wet, and then I put just a little bit of water. You're not soaking it up, this is just giving you some slicking room. So just slick it out, slick it out, slick it out. You can go every which way. All you're doing is just pushing the mud up and slicking it out. If you do this correctly, it almost acts as a second coat mud. So I'm just taking off the excess mud. You always want to do this before it dries and gets too strong, because once this stuff sets up, it sets up for good. So it's easier to manipulate it while it's still right before it really sets up. 5-minute mud, so maybe the 4-minute mark, you start working it. You gotta work quick before it dries, but that's why we put a little bit of water on it. It helps us manipulate it and glides. We're just scraping off the excess mud. We're not building up a lot of mud on here. We're just putting the mud where it's needed to fill in the deep areas. Same thing, work my way over, hit the edge, hit the edge, and that. You don't have to work it too hard. You don't have to make it look perfect. It's not perfect because it is just the first coat. The most important is to get rid of these edges and to take off the excess material. So I've taken off quite a bit, so that just gets rid of the hump on the ceiling. So now we're gonna follow through with the second coat mud. So I always like to go with the second coat, go a little past the first coat, so that gets rid of the first coat edges. This doesn't have to be, you're just basically doing a tight skin coat. This is just to make it look nice and pretty. The second coat's just to make it pretty. You're not building it up too heavy, you're just covering your existing first coat. So we just coat it out, same thing, feathered edge, and you just follow through. It doesn't have to be perfect, because after this sets up, we're gonna follow through with a wet sponge and slick it out and get it ready for texture. But I like to go past my first coat mud, feather the sides, That way, you can go this way, follow through. It doesn't have to be perfect, because you are working with hot muds that you can slick out. So now I have a little bit of mud, so I mix a little too much. But it's a nice second coat. We're gonna let that set up, and then do the same with the slick out with the wet sponge. Slick it out with a 6-inch knife, and let it set up, and then we're gonna do a texture. And you can see the texture here is pretty rough. It looks like a do-it-yourselfer, I'd say skip Santa Fe. So we're gonna mimic and try to match this texture with what they did here. It just looks like they used a little knife. That's how I can see with the little knife, and they just kind of did it. So we're gonna go through and do that technique after we let this second coat mud set up, and then we slick it out, then we'll do the texture. About 4 or 5 minutes, so I'm gonna check on my second coat mud. It should be setting up by now. What I like to do is just touch it. It's damp, but it's dry. So then same thing like the first coat mud, I just feather off the sides with a damp wet sponge. Feather the sides, and you want to blend in those sides really good. The most important is this edge that we're feathering in. I like to take my sticks, make sure it's clean, and then I go through it like the first coat. This way I'm gonna follow it, going vertically. Sometimes you have to wet it. If you start pulling scratches, you just clean the excess mud off your knife, and then you follow through. You can follow through any direction. You can go this way. Whatever it takes, you're just feathering it down, you're taking off the excess material. I always like to work with a damp sponge. It just makes my life a lot easier. There's a lot of guys that don't believe in the wet sponge technique. They just rather scrape it and coat it, but with this wet sponge, you're almost working with the ceramics clay, so you can manipulate it. Just enough moisture, it makes your knife just glide over it nice and nice. So we're taking off the extra materials. Sometimes you can follow it with the sponge and just make sure it's perfect. The whole idea after you slick out the second coat, if I paint it right now, will it look perfectly smooth. Perfect, smooth job. A lot of people think textures hide. That might be the case with this kind of texture, but most of the textures are just cosmetic. So we're just gonna feather this out nicely and basically treating the second coat slick out process as a finished product. If it's really bad, sometimes you have to follow through with a tight third coat. But in this instance, I think this will be good enough for texture because it looks really nice and slicked out. Sometimes by putting too many coats of mud on, you create a big hump effect. And we don't want to crown, they call it a crown joint. We don't want to crown these joints. We just want to make it nice and put the mud where it's needed. So now it's nice, we got a nice second coat on it. So now we're gonna follow through with the texture. I make sure my knives are clean and I'm set up. I got my ladder ready. I like to set myself up before I start texturing. Sometimes you gotta look for your tools. I like to mix up the mud thoroughly before any job so it's nice and creamy and ready to go. So there's no water on top, it's mixed in, nice and creamy. As you can tell, I'm just barely pulling up with the beater and it's still sticking to the beater, so that's a nice thickness. It's not too thin. You can't texture with watery, soupy mud. It has to be thick enough to stick to the tools. So this texture ain't gonna be a lot. I just need about 1/4 to a half a pan of texture. I just scoop out what I need. So basically I'm just setting myself up for the next step while my second coat mud dries. I like to always keep a lid on it, especially a hot sunny day like today. I like to keep it sealed up so it doesn't dry out and get clumps in it. I always put away my tools. You can see on this texture, it's kind of like a handmade. It's kind of probably hard to tell in the video, but it looks like just a skip trowel, attempted skip trowel. So I got my texture mud, that's just regular joint compound thinned down. It's not terribly thin, it still sticks to my knife. It's just right, you have to have the mud just right. So we're just gonna start doing basically like a skip trowel pattern and we're just gonna trowel it down. So I'm gonna skip it, skip it, skip it, skip it. So I wanna just do my whole reach area because I am on a little step stool ladder because this is an 8-foot ceiling. So I'm just gonna do as far as I can reach out without having to move the ladder. That gives me my work area. Some guys like to use planks or whatever to reach a farther work area, but I'm just using a basic step stool. This skip trowel, like in my last videos, they say they go one direction or this direction. This is going every which way. It's very busy, multi-directional skip trowel. So basically I put on my skip trowel like that, and this one it looks like it has like knife marks. It's like that, like they almost did like a knife start mark. They call them start marks. And then nothing to it. And then I'm just gonna trowel it down, lightly, trowel it down, trowel it down, trowel it down, trowel it down. This is a handmade texture that someone did here, so all we can do is just match it as best as possible. We get pretty close. You can never get 100% accuracy on these handmade textures. They do have standard textures. We got skip trowel, Santa Fe, knockdown splatters, acoustic, and crow's foot, and smooth wall. So anything past that is usually just a homemade handyman texture. They probably watched a YouTube video on a handyman on how to do drywall, but there is an art to it to get it to match just nice. So we do the best as we possible on these handmade textures to make it match the existing. But you can see we try to take it out a little further past the joint, and then just basically move my ladder along, and then we're just gonna keep skipping along. Nothing to it, it's pretty easy once you get a rhythm going, and I like to trowel it down after you put on your mud. Trowel it down. This is also a nice texture if you want to do like a room addition, you want to try to change a wall or do a wall design, faux wall, whatever you want to do. You can always try to make your own textures. I don't recommend it because then it gets tougher for someone to match any repairs you got, but sometimes you can make your own textures if that's what makes you happy. So you can see the existing textures, nothing to it. It's kind of just like, oh, just a bunch of knife marks, knife marks, knife marks. So we're doing pretty good with matching this. I got another couple feet to go, about 2 or 3 feet. And we're just going to continue on with the skip process after I move my ladder. Now you got it all on, I just like to go through and follow back and just trowel it down. You can trowel it down every which way. I'm just crossing over the joint this way. Sometimes going with the joint, we like to go the opposite of the joint. And that's just to cross it off, kind of fill it in. Right here I still have a little bit of mud left, so I'm just going to use up my mud, at least most of it, so don't waste any materials, and just take this repair out further and wider. That helps blend it into the existing, a nice feather out. So we always want to get the materials on the actual repair, and whatever's left over we'll just take and just feather it out a little more. Make it a nice blend in. Nice feathered out, feathered out. So it's a nice blend transition so you don't see a big repair in the center of the ceiling. And this texture right here is pretty rough, so he probably doesn't even need to sand this. Just let it dry 24 hours. And you can see those stains I did earlier. They completely disappeared, but I am going to recommend that he uses a Kills latex primer before he paints over the stain areas. So we just take this out further, blend it in, nothing to it. I want to use up my mud. I already have it mixed up, ready to go. It's just a regular joint compound for texture. I don't use 5 minutes, and I don't use quick set muds for texture. I have my own opinions with that kind of mud. It's just used for coating. I don't like to use it on textures because the textures are more smoother, creamier finish. The textures, muds, I always use a joint compounds, or I'll use a red line, or they even have powder form textures you can mix, but we just go to the regular joint compound. It's not the lightweight compound, it's just a regular joint compound. But you see that stain from earlier that I put the Kills stain blocker on, you can't even see it. But while I'm here I have some texture, so I'm just gonna clean it up a little bit. Clean it up. Just put a little bit of skip trowel, it won't hurt. This texture in here is pretty heavy, pretty busy. It's going every which way, skip trowel. So it's kind of really heavy, really busy texture that's going on here. So it doesn't hurt that, take it out further, and make it blend in. I pretty much used all my materials, so that'll make it easier for me to clean up when I'm done here, because I used up all my materials. I don't want to waste materials. It already called for this much materials on the job, so we're just going to use it up and just make a perfect job. We're going to go to 120, 130% here on this project. But you can tell that faded out nicely. That's a nice joint seam from every angle. You want to always check every angle, because sometimes lighting changes different angles. So I like to take a look at my project and make sure everything's good before I start cleaning up. So I basically looked at it at every angle and it looks good, it checks out, so that's a nice job.